Okay, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be here in the Music Museum today to deliver this talk to you. So, put together this little Korg chronology kind of timeline for Korg, and hopefully you enjoy all the musical examples I'm going to be playing on our brand new Kronos 3 as well. So a lot of the sounds from our heritage I can recreate quite accurately on the Kronos. So that's the way we're going to be doing it. So the Korg story started in 1962 and in Tokyo, in Japan, and it was founded, the company, by a guy called Mr. Kato, and there you can see some photos of him. And he was quite a remarkable man. Originally he ran a nightclub, and that kind of drove his passion for music, and then he decided to form Korg as a company. And the headquarters are in Japan. The first headquarters, in fact, were the ones on the left, you can see there, which we still have premises there, but the new building is the one on the right. So it's a fantastic facility where all the R&D takes place and everything else to do with the company. So I'm going to take you on a journey from 1963 to the present day via the Kronos, as I said. So the very first product that we released was called the DoncaMatic. And the DoncaMatic was a drum machine. It was a contemporary of the Wurlitzer Sideman, but because there were certain limitations with that instrument, Mr. Kato-san, he decided to improve that and make the DoncaMatic. And the name came from the sound it made. It sounded like donka, 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 because it was a very, very primitive drum machine. I've got a little bit of an example here, kind of what it sounds like. Sounds a bit like this. And as you can see, it even had a little keyboard on there, so you could trigger the drum samples from there. It was called a rotary drum machine, so it had big discs inside which played the sounds. And it was massive. It was like as big as a washing machine almost. So it wasn't that practical to gig with, but it's what they were dealing with at the time. So it was really cool. And there's a really nice little story with the origins of this instrument, and then bringing it to current day. The band Gorillaz actually saw a video of Kato-san talking about the DoncaMatic, and they really liked the way he said DoncaMatic. And so they decided to sample it and actually make a record out of it. So I've got a little clip of him talking there, and then you'll hear the extract.
なかなかこのユニークなネーミングだと思うんですけど、ドンカマチック。でこれじゃあどういうしてドンカマティックになったかというと、まあ今盛んにね、スタジオなんかでドンカマっていうことがありますね。あれドンカマで切るからおかしいんですよね。
So as you can hear there, they actually sampled him from that video. They got our permission and everything. And yeah, he was just honoured to have that happen. And yeah, ended up on a music track. So it's quite a strange story, but that's what happened. So that was the DoncaMatic. So there were three main people in the early days of Korg who were very influential. So you had Kato-san himself, and then he's in the middle there. And then on the right is a chap called Osanai. And he was actually an accordion player in the nightclub. So there's a little bit of a link with accordions to Korg, which we'll touch on a bit later. And then on the left was Fumio Maeda, and he's a bit of a legend within Korg because he actually invented Japan's first synthesizer, which was called Prototype Number 1. And then he went on to create lots of legendary instruments for us as well, which you'll see in this timeline. Now, in terms of the name, originally it was called Kaoss Electronics, but that wasn't a very catchy name. So they decided to take the word Kaoss and merge it with the word organ to create Korg, and that's how the name came about. So throughout the 60s and early 70s, they kind of took this DoncaMatic idea, refined it a little bit, shrunk it down. They made several different drum machines, yeah, kind of refined that technology. But then in 1973, we released Japan's first commercial synthesizer, which was called the Mini Korg 700. Now, this was a very, very sought-after instrument, and it still is today. And it was designed originally to sit on top of like an organ or Fender Rhodes. And then, as you can see, all the controls are on the front panel there. So you can easily kind of get to them when you're playing your lower keyboard. You can access the top keyboard. And it was great for like nice bass lines and leads as well, because it was a monophonic synth, of course, at this time. So that kind of led on, after a few years' development, to one of our real pillars of our timeline, if you like, and that was the MS-20. And that's what the MS-20 looks like. A lot of these products you'll be able to check out downstairs, of course, in our gallery as well. Now, this was what we call a semi-modular synthesizer. So it had two parts to it. It had the left side, which was all the hands-on controls, and you can use those without having to worry about the right side. But the right side had this amazing patch bay on it. So that meant you can reroute your signals and be a little bit more experimental. And it even had an external in processor, which a lot of people used to manipulate their sounds and add the amazing filtered sounds of the MS-20, for example, on external equipment. Let's have a little bit of a listen to what the MS-20 sounds like. So it was made famous on this track, for instance. It also has two filters, so it has a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter, which you can use in conjunction with each other. So you can either sweep all the highs out, all the lows out, or kind of bandpass sculpture a frequency as well, which is really cool. And it's also it can be very aggressive sounders as well. So great for this kind of stuff. There's a whole family of these MS instruments as well. So as you see there, you've got the MS-20. You also had the MS-10, which was a single oscillator version instead of two oscillators. You had also part of that family, the VC-10, the one on the right, that was a vocoder. So again, you can see that downstairs. So that was kind of MS technology, but using a vocoder as well, and various other variations of the MS-20 as well. It was also used a lot in Japan for teaching synthesis. And as you can see there, there's whole like classrooms full of MS-20 people using, learning synthesizers. But crucially, at the very front there, you see there's a teacher with an absolutely massive MS-20. And that's called the MS-20 Blackboard. We've got one of those downstairs as well. And that was literally used for teachers in colleges to teach synthesis on the MS-20, but in a massive format. So they could see all the controls replicated in giant form. So that was quite fun. You've also got lots of different modern iterations of the MS-20. In the Kronos, of course, we've got an engine in here which replicates the MS-20, but you've also got the MS-20 Mini, so that's still a current product for us. We actually reissued it a few years ago, and that's still going strong for us. There's an iOS app version of it. There's a software version of it on PC and Mac, and we also made kit versions, as you can see bottom left there. And also, we had a kind of module version of it with an SQ1 sequencer as well. So there have been lots of different versions of this throughout the years. And like I said, it's still available to buy today in the form of an MS-20 Mini, which is an analog recreation of the original. So what's next? Well, this is actually going backwards slightly, because I just wanted to draw your attention to the PS3300, because this came out actually the year before MS-20, and this technology laid the foundation really for the MS-20 being possible. But this was an absolute behemoth of a synthesizer. Still today, but especially back then, it's a fully polyphonic synthesizer, 48 voices, which means you can play every key simultaneously, whereas things like the MS-20 were just monophonic, so you could only play single bass lines or melodies. So this really was, for the time, unbelievable. As you can see there, it's got 3 modules to it, all stacked on top of each other, so you can get some absolutely incredible sounds out of it. And there were actually a family of these. The PS, by the way, stands for Polyphonic synthesizers. That's why it's called PS. So there was the 3100, and there was also a 3200, which you see there. So the 3100 was a single oscillator version of it. And then you had the 3200, which actually introduced patch memories as well. And I've got a little sound clip here of the 3300 in action, just to give you a flavor of what it can sound like. Here we go. So there you go, like just so powerful. And it had these effects in it called a resonator, which is part of the circuit, which gives it that kind of phasing effect, which is quite magical, really. And yeah, so moving on, we did the CX3 in 1979. So this was a different type of instrument again. So this was actually like a kind of Hammond organ type instrument, but we decided to make it a lot more portable and also put the rotary effect inside rather than having to lug this massive kind of Leslie speaker to go with it. So this was actually, for the time, really popular amongst gigging musicians. I'll get you a little sound example of that. It was also available in a 2-manual version as well, called the BX3. And for some reason in the picture, they've put a trombone on top, so I don't really understand why they've done that. And a drum machine of some description, a Korg one as well. So, yeah. But that was basically the same instrument, just double manual, and you could get a pedal board for it as well. So you could kind of turn it into a pseudo Hammond type instrument if you want. But really, what the CX3 was all about was that portability and having that great sound, but in a really giggable format. That was its strength, really. So moving on, a couple of years later, we had another momentous synth for us. This was called the Monopoly. So this was a 4-voice analog synthesizer. As you can see, lots of hands-on control. And it was great for kind of pad sounds like this. But you could also arrange those 4 oscillators in different ways. So for instance, you could have them playing in a round robin format. So you could play them one by one individually, which is quite a unique kind of sound it gave it, because they could all have different tunings. So you could play little melodies or just slightly detuned, so you get a nice character there. Or you could just sum them all together, stack them up, so you had a mega kind of bass kind of machine, basically. So great for stuff like this. So yeah, it's just a killer kind of sounding synth. And also in that same year, we had the Poly 6. So similar kind of looking synth, slightly different shape. But the big thing with this one is, first of all, it was 6-voice polyphonic. So you could play kind of bigger stacks of chords. And this had a really nice, silky, smooth sound to it. So it's great for like hollow kind of pads like this. But again, it was also really nice for smooth bass lines. Sound a bit like this. also had an arpeggiator built in as well. So this was giving you some sort of more opportunities to do what you need to do. So, and for motion within the sound. So you could start to do stuff like this. So that was kind of winding towards the end of the analog period, towards the sort of early 80s. And then something momentous happened in 1983 with the birth of MIDI. So this stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And it was really a coming together of the greatest minds in the industry, which, to my knowledge, has never really happened before or since. So all the major manufacturers, Roland, Yamaha, Korg, Kawai, Sequential, and a few others all got together, and their top engineers got together and developed this protocol, which meant that all keyboards could talk to each other, and also early computers as well, and that was very significant. So that basically meant that you could then control one keyboard from another, or vice versa, but not just notes, because we've kind of had that before with CV and gate, but it just opened up the possibilities for controlling things like all the CC messages, for filters, for envelopes, for effects. It was just an absolutely incredible achievement. And the fact the whole industry came together to do it is something that I really like. So that also sort of brought the age of digital synths. So other manufacturers had theirs, we had a couple, and our first really, really great digital synth, in my opinion, was the DW series. So we had the 6000 and the 8000, and actually this was a hybrid synth. So it used digital waveforms, but then it was still sent through analog filters, and that's why it's still coveted today, because it kind of has the best of both in a way. So there's two models of this, the 6000 and the 8000, and this was quite a nice entry for us into the digital age. You also saw some of the manufacturers doing some hybrid synths as well, until it went sort of fully digital for a while. And you'll notice that particular synthesizer, and lots of them in that period, did away with all of the hands-on controls. So all you had was little LED controls, and then you just keying in numbers. So it was a completely different workflow. Not for everyone, but yeah, it was incredibly popular at the time. So that was the DW series in '85. And then our massive milestone, which followed that a couple of years later, was the M1. So this was really the dawn of the workstation. So the workstation basically meant, rather than just being a synth where you make sounds and then maybe save those sounds and use them in productions, the workstation meant you could bring a lot of different techniques into one keyboard. So you could do all of that, of course, via the sample engine, and then save your sounds and create sounds. But also you could stack up lots of sounds together. You could have an 8-part combi, or combination as we called it, in the M1, and that terminology still lives on today. And it meant you could get some absolutely massive sounds, plus it had a sequencer in it as well, and that was crucial. Never really had a proper sequencer in a keyboard before. So to combine all of that technology in one keyboard, as well as drum sounds and everything, so you could do complete tracks, and then being able to save it onto a card, was pretty revolutionary. So that was the M1, and it had lots of very, very famous signature sounds, and I'm sure you know. So the first patch was called Universe, which sounded like this. And it helped define a whole genre of house music with the piano sound. Also used on, as you probably know, thousands and thousands of records, including this one. So you can hear some of those M1 sounds coming in that track. And of course, it had another very, very famous sound in there called the organ. Used on countless albums, including Queen's Innuendo for this track. And it had a really unique choir sound in there as well. So that really shook up the music industry, and as you can hear, lots of signature sounds all over the M1. So an instrument we're very proud of. And then a couple of years later, we followed that up with a similar looking instrument, but very different sounding instrument called the workstation. So this used a different kind of technique of creating sounds entirely called wave sequencing. So this was basically taking lots and lots of tiny little samples and chaining them together to create quite unique steppy kind of sequences, like this kind of thing, for example. So you can hear all those little chunky little samples being streamed, and of course you can tempo sync that, so it made it quite musical at the same time. But you could also then chain those samples in a different way. You could actually crossfade them all together quite slowly and smoothly as well. So it's fabulous for like big pad sounds. And it had another type of technology in there called vector synthesis. This basically meant, I don't know if you can see it on the picture there, but on the left side it's got a joystick. We still have that on the Kronos here. And that allowed you to kind of just feel your way through the sounds and the different layers, and again, in a very musical and creative way. So you could play your chords. And then pull out different layers, or if you put the joystick in the middle, then it brings all the sounds together. It was also used very famously to create the Apple startup sound as well. That particular sound was made from a preset called Sandman, which sounds like this. And it was an edited version of that, basically, which the engineers at Apple used to make the Apple startup sound, which still is used today. And it was also used on tracks like this as well. That is just such a wave station sound. I just love it. Okay, let's move on along the timeline. So next we had another keyboard, a different type of keyboard again in 1993 called the i3. So this was, I suppose you describe it today as like an arranger keyboard, and Korg, I think, called it a professional arranger. So it was basically all the great synth sounds that they've been developing over the years from the M1 and the L1W after that, and so on, but put into a different kind of format where you could play a chord and it would play a rhythm for you and play a pattern with some drums, and then you could jam over the top. And this was quite a new kind of idea for Korg themselves. So that kind of then birthed a whole generation of keyboards for us called the Professional Arranger series, and you can see there our current one is the PA5X, which is still going today. So what was next? Well, in 1994, the following year, we had the wave drum. So again, brand new technology called physical modeling. So this time, instead of using samples, as had been the trend from sort of like the M1 onwards, they decided to start making the sounds from the ground up using algorithms, which meant that they can then control the development of the sound in more detail, plus you could be more creative and create unique sounds rather than just trying to mimic existing pianos and strings and choirs and everything else. So the idea of physical modeling is that you can take a sound and really morph it, almost like elastic, and take it in different directions. So I've got an example of a guitar here, because we have physical modeling, same sort of physical modeling we had in the wave drum in the Kronos. So just take our regular kind of guitar sound, but by using my vector joystick again, I can actually then just morph that to more of a kind of sitar sound or something like this. Almost like a rotary effect or something a bit more. Bit harder edged, or even something really experimental like this. So we just transformed it into kind of a bell sound. So you can hear it's not switching in samples, it's literally morphing that sound, like I said, like elastic into different forms. So it's a very, very creative type of synthesis. Takes a bit of getting used to and knowledge about how to use it, but what's great about having the interface of the vector joystick, you can just kind of dive in and just try your sounds, which is great. So that type of technology was then put into a keyboard, and that was called the Prophecy. So that came in 1995, and it was used famously by the Prodigy on this track. So yeah, you could kind of use that technology of the physical modeling not just for acoustic instruments or guitars or drums. You could also use it for analog modeling synths as well, as you could hear there. And I can really go to town with the vector joystick again to morph that synth sound. In that same year, in 1995, we had the Trinity. But before that, we'd been developing our workstation kind of range alongside all the other technology we'd been developing. So we had the M1, then we had the T series, then we had the O1W as well, which is, again, a very coveted synthesizer. But then in 1995, the Trinity hit, and again, a bit like the M1, it kind of changed everything because it was a completely different format. It had this fabulous touch screen in the middle, and it was our first keyboard with a touch screen on it. And everything was expanded from the M1 and the O1W days, so more sounds, bigger samples, more realistic instruments, bigger combi sounds, arpeggiators, even audio recording on the Trinity. So it really took it to the next level. So you could do things like sampling, and you could do these really big, expansive combis, which we still hear today in our workstations, stuff like this. So you can see a whole rig of Korg stuff there. Let's go back to the timeline and see what came next. So 1999 was, I keep saying momentous kind of time for Korg, but this really was a momentous year because we actually launched 2 new pillars of our product categories and also reinforced another. So the first one was the Kaoss pad. So this was, again, something completely different for Korg. showing Korg's innovation throughout the years, really. And this was an effects processor. So this was designed to plug into pretty much any audio source and then manipulate that via that touchpad. And again, that touchpad was a unique thing in the industry at the time. So DJs particularly liked it because they could put their tracks through it and then start performing those tracks with things like effects and even added sounds. And then over the years, we expanded that Kaoss pad into lots of different models, as you can see here. And right until the present day, which is the Kaoss Replay, which you can play back samples on as well. Also in that same year, we had the Electribe series. Again, a massive brand within a brand, if you like, and very popular with musicians. So originally there were two in 1999. There was a rhythm unit and a synth unit. And they were great because you could play just your sounds on the pads there, but you could also chain all those sounds together to make patterns. They're like groove boxes. You could connect them together so they're playing sync. And again, throughout the years, we've had a whole range of these up to the EMX and the ESX and the ESX2, which are the current models today. Third product in that same year was the Triton. So the Triton was very much a spiritual successor to the Trinity. Similar kind of looking keyboards, just everything was beefed up. It had some really famous sounds in there as well, like this express lead, which musicians like as a lead sound. And some great kind of rhythmic synth sounds like this. Then in the following year, we had, before that, we had obviously lots of iterations of the Triton throughout the years. So we had the Triton Studio, and then a rack version as well. We had rack versions of a lot of these instruments, like the M1, the O1W, and so on, as was the trend back then. And then we had the Triton Extreme, of course, which was the ultimate Triton. So we changed the colour of it to make it blue, put a valve in it from the Electribe, and just gave it everything we had at that time, and it was a fabulous instrument. So then in the year 2000, we had the MS-2000. So this really marked a departure away from these digital synths with not many controls on to, as you can see, more of an analog synth looking instrument. So that was actually quite significant. It was a great sounding synth, and you could get some really nice complex modulations on it as well, stuff like this. The following year, we had Karma. So this, again, a famous Korg keyboard again, a red keyboard this time, and this one was based around the Triton sound engine, but it had this Karma technology in it, which was developed by Stephen Kay, who was an in-house Korg employee at the time. And it was quite incredible, actually. It was like really, really advanced arpeggiators. So I'll just give you an example, because again, we still have that technology in the Kronos here. So we can have a harp sound like that. But if I turn on the Karma now, it'll play that instrument like the instrument it's intended to be, like a harp, for example. So it'll do some nice strums. Or maybe a guitar. So if I've got this nice distortion guitar, turn on Karma, and it will play like a kind of picked pattern for me. And it's got loads of these patterns built in, and of course you can stack them on top of each other to make multi-instrument setups, drums included as well. So yeah, great sounding keyboard and very different, and again, one really coveted by musicians still today. In the following year, we had another one of our classics, which was the Korg. This went on to be the best-selling synthesizer of all time, and it's still going today. We've had several different iterations of this as well, and it had a vocoder built in. What made this really special was it was really affordable, but it sounded amazing because basically it was most of the technology from the MS-2000 distilled down into this smaller case, still with a vocoder, really easy to use, and became kind of most musicians' sort of first synthesizer. So we're very proud of the Korg, and it still carries on today. Then in 2005, we had another big milestone in our synthesizer history, which was the OASYS. And this really was quite a special synthesizer. And as you can see there, came in this amazing kind of chassis, very, very expensive, but it was completely groundbreaking technology with that big screen on it, loads of hands-on control again. The move again towards that was evident. But what really set this one apart is it had, we moved into like what we call an engine concept. So instead of just having one operating system or engine to do everything, we introduced different instruments. So it meant that we could use a keyboard more like you would expect to see in modern day DAWs, where you have plugins or software instruments to do specific tasks. And the Kronos very much carries on that tradition. So when the OASYS came out, that was quite groundbreaking. And as time went on, they added a few more engines to it. And so it was very much closer to working in software in that you could get lots of different colours and textures and different characters out of the same keyboard, which up until then wasn't really possible. Your keyboard sounded like the keyboard. If it sounded like an M1 or a Triton or something else, it was very difficult to get away from that sound, and the OASYS was a real departure away from that, which is great. And of course, Korg are really famous for making software as well as hardware. So in 2005, we had our Legacy Collection software, which came with a little MS-20 mini controller, which was really cool. And that meant we could start emulating a lot of our classic synths in software form, and that still goes on today with the Korg Collection. We've emulated most of the synths I've been talking about today with the Korg Collection, and that's all available to buy just in one bundle, or you can just download individual synths if that's what you want to get. And we also helped develop with Apple the iOS platform for music. So we actually had the first music app on an iPad, which was the iElectribe back in the day. So we've really been kind of quite groundbreaking in terms of music apps as well. And as you can see, you can replicate a lot of our synths in iOS format if you want to do that. And I see a Monopoly board has flashed on the screen. So that basically was a collaboration with the Monopoly, the people who make the Monopoly game, and our Monopoly app. So we actually made a Monopoly skin for the app. So that, to me, that just sums up Korg, because it's just so quirky to come out with stuff like that. So yeah, lots and lots of software out there if you want to go and check out any of that. A lot of it's really affordable as well and sounds incredible. So in 2012, things kind of came full circle, and we started making analog products again. This was the first analog product we made from the 80s, since the 80s, which was called the Monotron. So the original Monotron was a tiny little synth with a little ribbon controller on it, and it was a monophonic synthesizer. Sounded quite basic, but a nice fat sound. It had the filter from the MS-10 in it. So the same circuit. So that made it instantly desirable, mainly because it had an audio input. So it meant you could take any synth or any sound source, put it through the Monotron, and then back out, and then you've got an MS-10 filter for like 30 quid. And it was like so popular, I can't even describe to you how many of these are sold. So then we made different iterations of it. We made the Monotron Duo, which was a 2-oscillator synth, and then the Delay, which was that same great sound and filter, but going through this incredible kind of spacey delay, so it was great for sound effects. So that really laid the foundations for where we are today in terms of making analog synths again, because it was a journey we went on from the Monotron 13 years ago. And then the next product we kind of brought out after that was the Volcas. So initially there were 3 of them, and there are actually 10 in the series now, so that's the Beats, the Bass, and the keys, and they were basically little groove boxes in a kind of analog electribe vein, if you like, and you could chain them together. So again, very, very popular because they're just so affordable and sound great because they're analog. Following the Volcas, we then had the Minilog, 2016. And again, really, really popular synth. Taking that analog technology, putting it in a keyboard really for the first time. And then we expanded upon that technology with the Prologue in 2018. And this was basically a hybrid synth. So it was fully analog, but it had a third oscillator, which was a digital oscillator, which allowed you to then load in your own waveforms and get creative with digital and analog together, still going through that fabulous analog filter. Then in 2020 and 2021, we had the OP6, wave state and mod wave. We had the OP6 wave state and mod wave keyboards. So these were digital synths. And these really were, although they were brand new, they were using some of the technology we've been talking about today from our other synths. So we had, for instance, in the wave state, we had some of the DNA from our original wave station. And in the mod wave, we had some of the DNA from our DW series with wavetable synthesis and wave sequencing, respectively. So, and then, of course, the OP6 was a killer FM synthesizer as well. So, again, harping back to the 80s, the birth of MIDI and everything, and people were hankering after that FM sound. And again, that's come full circle because people are really loving FM again. So that's why the OP6 happened. Then we had, in that same format, the multi-poly. So the multi-poly came out last year, and this is, again, kind of using a little bit of calling back the monopoly heritage in terms of the look of it, but also that round-robin technology I was telling you, where you can actually round-robin between your oscillators. On this one, it's the same thing, but between the 4 layers that you've got on there. So we're just pulling back a few things from the past whilst pushing things forward. And also, we had a new addition to the microKORG line last year as well, microKORG 2. So again, same format, still with a vocoder, but just improved the sound engine and the user interface as well. So right at the very beginning, you remember I talked about an accordion player in the nightclub. Well, that becomes suddenly relevant now because we've actually recently released a Korg accordion as well, called the Fisa Suprema. So, and feedback from musicians playing this has been absolutely phenomenal because a lot of research went into not just the sound of it, but also the feel, because that's so important when you're playing the accordion. So the bellows themselves apparently feel pretty much exactly like playing a real instrument. So that's a new experiment for us, but it seems to be going pretty well. So yeah, and also last year, we brought back another synthesizer we talked about earlier, the 3300. So this is the PS3300, which you can check out downstairs. It's in the Korg Gallery now. So full recreation of the original, but we actually borrowed a couple of bits from the 3100 and 3200 as well. So this one, for instance, has the presets from the 3200 as well, so you can actually save your sounds, which you couldn't do on the original. And of course, it's got MIDI and USB, so you can kind of integrate it into your modern setup easier as well. So we've got, I can't even see what that is. What is it? It's workstations. Yeah, oh yeah, sorry, yeah. So this is the evolution of the workstation. So we're going to bring it full circle back to Kronos now, because obviously we had the M1, then we had Trinity, Triton, OASYS, and the OASYS DNA is very, very firmly planted in the Kronos. So we took that engine concept and we expanded it even further with the Kronos, and now we're onto the Kronos 3. So a lot of the things you've heard today are using the different engines like the MS-20, the Poly 6, the string modeling engine, and some of the others. And I just wanted to play you a couple of other sounds really from our modern Kronos. So it's got an absolutely fantastic piano engine in there, which you can really tweak to whichever samples you want. So you can play really nice piano sounds. And we've really improved a lot of the string libraries in here as well. So you've got great orchestral type strings. And you can control them, do surges and things like that on the mod wheel. And you can also still got your massive combination mode, and we're now up to 16 parts, so you can get some incredible, big sounding orchestral sounds. So you can do all that from one sound, and using different velocities, you can really pull out all the different colors and textures in an orchestra just from one sound, which is amazing. Also in the OASYS and now in the Kronos, we had recording. So we had 16-track MIDI and 16-track audio recorder as well. So it's powerful from a production point of view. And I'm just going to finish and leave you now with one sequence, which was done entirely, all the sounds are from the Kronos, and I'm going to play over the top of the sequence using the setlist mode. So there we go. Hope you've enjoyed. If you've got any questions, come and see me at the end. I'll be hanging around. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the show.